Okay. Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Jefferson. I'm a software developer at CodeMiner42, and today we're going to talk about web accessibility. So, in a nutshell, web accessibility is about creating and managing content on the web that can be not only functional, but understandable and operable by anyone, especially with people with disabilities. Okay? A11Y is a short, basically a short of the word accessibility, and it is also a common term to refer to web accessibility on the internet. Okay. Now, talking about standards, WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is a set of practice and guidelines to help you make web content more accessible to people with impairments. Okay, so these guidelines are grouped in four principles that are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, which basically means that your users must be able to perceive the content in more than one sense, human sense. They must be able to control and understand information in all of the interactive elements on your page. And also, they must be able to consume the same web content by different browsers and different assisted technologies. Okay. And there's also WebAIM, which stands for Web Accessibility in Mind, which is basically a short version of a summary of the WCAG guidelines in a form of a checklist, which is really easy to follow and less overwhelming. Okay, so you can check that out as well. Now, moving to focus. When we say focus, we are talking about the control of the interactive elements on a page or screen that can receive input from the keyboard. So usually, keyboard users or users with visual impairments will navigate through your site using the Tab and Shift Tab keys to move forwards and backwards, like this image right here. Okay. So how do we manage focus? You can use the tab index attribute. Tab index equals 1 means that the element will be in his natural tab order. Okay, so when we say about tab order, we are saying that the tab order will say what is the previous and next element that will receive focus. Okay, and there's also tab index -1, which means that the element will not be in the tab order, or for example, they will be focused via keyboard, but you can still use your mouse or JavaScript to manipulate that. Okay, so there's also tab index equals 1 or anything greater than 0, which it's not recommended because tab index different than 0 or -1 means that the element will jump on the tab order, even if the element does not have a tab index. So this can be really confusing, and it's considered an anti-pattern. So usually, if you need to move something in the DOM, the position of the elements, I'm sorry, okay, I mean, if you need to move something in the tab order, you should use the DOM stat, because assistant technology does not know that. You cannot understand the CSS or the several tab index attributes applied. So whenever you need to move something in the tab order, choose the DOM stat whenever it's possible. Now, there's some useful techniques. You might have situations where you have a large number of links, or I should say a large navigation. And as you might imagine, a blind user would have to tab through all of these navigation links just to get into the important part. So you can add a link, which will be only visible when focused. So the user, when they first land on the website, they can tap once and then press enter and go directly to the main content. Okay. Next, you can also ignore or not expose element to assistive technologies. For example, you can use either visibly hidden or display none to so screen readers don't have to worry about this element. This element will not be visible for them as well. And you can also debug and restore focus using JavaScript. So document.activeElement enables us to, for example, if a user is on a website and then a pop-up or modal shows up on the page, when you close the modal, usually the focus of the last element is lost. But if you use active element, we can do some sort of technique to store these focus elements, so then they can exit the modal, close the modal, and then go back exactly where they was, exactly where the user was. Okay. Now, how can we make image accessible? You probably might know this already, so we can use the alt text or alt attribute to provide a meaningful text alternative to an image. So for instance, in this example, you might have a short description or something more elaborate. Yeah, so it really depends on the context, honestly. So you might have an image that is more decorative, or an image that is more sort of like a caption, or it might have some function. So it really depends on the context and the elements surrounding this image. By the way, I'll leave an article in the video description so you can learn about more about that. Okay. So now semantics. Before the screen reader, the assistive technologies can read the content, can speak this information to the end users. They must use the accessibility tree first. So the accessibility tree, you can think of that as a DOM representation, which takes all of the semantic information, names and attributes, to form a uniform and useful accessibility tree that can be used to all sorts of assistive technologies. So, for example, this is what it looks like when you open the DevTools on Chrome or Firefox. You can see the tree structure, all of the different elements and rules, and the area attributes, different properties and states as well, which we'll talk about in a second. So, since assistive technologies rely only on the accessibility tree, the more you spend time on native elements or improving semantics, the greater will be the final experience to the end users, user with impairments, especially understanding the content. Okay. So, what if I build my own component? How can we do that? So this is where ARIA comes in. WAI-ARIA stands for Web Accessibility Initiative Accessible Rich Internet Explanation. It's quite a long sentence. It's a W3C specification for providing additional semantics in situations where native elements don't have a sufficient meaning. So it works by specifying area attributes can be ultimately translated into the accessibility tree. So for example, how can you use area attributes? So we can define labels. So here I have a button with some sort of icon, which visually they might look cool, but for blind users, it's more useful if you define a label if this element does not have some text or some sort of description inside of it. So you can use area label, which is pretty simple. It's just a string. And there's also area labeled by. Area labeled by is pretty much like the label attribute, but the label element, but the label element only works inside forms, and then you only reference inputs and text areas. So you can use the area label by to reference the idea of another element that will kind of like a title or name to describe this section of content. And it can also receive more than one element, more than one reference to describe the same content. Okay. There is a third option, which is area described by. Area described by, we can pass the reference to an element which most of the time will be like a additional information, a helper text, something that might not be visible initially on the page. And then, as we spoke earlier, screen readers can read content even if they are visible on the page, like if it has some opacity 0, it can even say that. So it can describe, so it can add additional information to the user scene so it can complete his action using the area described by. Okay. Now, roles. You can think of roles pretty much like a type of component we're trying to build. So there's a bunch of these components that can receive or combine with different states and properties. Okay. So, for example, with area, we can also declare control over elements. So in this case, I have the button element, which that has these area controls attributes. So here I'm saying that to the screen reader, this is not just a button. This is a button that controls another element which has this ID, the menu items. So you can identify elements that can be controlled by this other element. Okay. In this case, we can either show or not display the drop-down menu. Okay. So, in relationships, for example, we might have some structure like this, which is just these elements that are siblings. So we can use the area owns attribute to enhance this semantics to specify an element to be treated as a child, because visually it's a menu with a submenu that you can hover over it. But this is not enough information to screen readers. But if you add the area own submenu, now we can say that these elements who have the direct parent-child relationship with this element over here. Okay. Yeah, so before we go to the next slide, so I'll show you a quick example using the screen reader and how can the area attributes enhance and improve our experience. Okay, so for example, I have here 3 types of components, and then you can pretend now you are just a blind user navigating through this website. So then I'll turn on my screen reader right now, and I'll focus on this piece. Okay, so tap first on this element right here. Okay, so it says it's a button, but button for what? I mean, started off information. Now, the next element. Okay, I know it is a checkbox, but there's no labels. What is this? The next one. Okay, is it add a level Y, but I don't know if this is a pop-up. I don't know if this is a tooltip. Oops, let me turn off. So how can we fix that? Here I have this HTML structure for this element, and I will add some area labels, as I explained, to enhance the semantics. So here I'm adding the area label to open menu, area controls, and area label Y. So now look what happens next. I'll turn on the screen reader now. Okay, now I'll focus on the element. Now it is saying that it opens a menu. So this is more useful to understand. And here, this is a toggle dark mode checkbox. And here, now it says the full description. Yeah, the one is the number of the word accessibility. Okay, let me turn off. Now I'll go back to the slides. Now, okay, so talking about color contrast. So here I have 3 pieces of UI. They all look nice, they all look good, but they share the same problem, which is they all have a bad contrast ratio. So what is a contrast ratio? A contrast ratio is the difference between the color of the foreground and the color of the background. And by foreground, I mean the color of the text. So the difference between the color of the text and the background color. And this value can range between 1 and 21. And there are some criteria in the feature documentation. So large text, which is text with greater than or equal to 24 pixels, must have a contrast ratio of at least 3:1, and body text must have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5. And then a second criteria, which is focused more to viewers with low vision, they have a large text must have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5, and body text must have a contrast ratio of at least 7:1. And of course, I won't get into the equation of how this is calculated, but just keep in mind that you need to have this minimum to your headings and this minimum amount to your body text. Okay. And you can also use your browser. So if we inspect a title like this one, we can see what is the contrast value. And then if this value matches the criteria. And here on the right, in the styles, you can click on the color. And then there's these two lines right here that we can pick whatever color here, which will have the right contrast ratio always. Okay, this is a really nice feature to test on Chrome browsers. Yeah, so the general rule is do not use a white text on a bright, do not use a bright text on a bright background, and also don't use color that are too close to one another in the color wheel. For example, orange and yellow or green and yellow. So in this way, you can have a piece of text that matches the criteria, has the right color contrast, and is more distinguishable with the elements surrounding. Okay. So how do we measure if our website is accessible or not? So we can use the Lighthouse, which is available on Chrome. There are some extensions as well, like X and Wave, the accessibility insights for web, and then some NPM packages if you're building a JavaScript application or something like that. Okay, so yeah, good accessibility equals good UX. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. And yeah, I see you guys in the next one. Bye.